everybody, I'm your host Chris, and this is a different type of comic tropes. This is not scripted, it's not really planned out or anything. This is just a short stream of conscious type of episode where I want to talk about something. So I was looking for Thanksgiving themed comics to read leading up to the holidays, and I came across an interesting one. Walt Disney's Comics number 546. There's so many angles I could go on here because I would love to talk about how Walt Disney's comics and stories started publishing in 1940 and it's still being published today, and it's been by tons of different publishers. Disney just keeps lining up different publishers depending on what the best option is for them. They've been at Dell, Gold Key, Boom Studios, they're at IDW today, they were at Gladstone at this point in 1990. I could talk about Carl Barks, the guy known as the good duck artist to fans of Donald Duck and his nephews. Carl Barks was a genius. He got started at Disney as an in-betweener for the animation in 1935, and about 3 or 4 years later, he sort of got tired of that. He left Disney. He wanted to do comics, and he started doing the Donald Duck stories in Walt Disney's Comics and Stories. I believe Dell had the license at that point in time, and he created all these characters that you know of. Scrooge McDuck, the idea of Duckburg, Gizmo, no, not Gizmo, Gyro Gearloose, right? He's the inventor. Who else? The Beagle Boys, Daisy's nieces, April, May, and June. He created tons of ideas for it, and his art is very, very well respected. People love him. And that's kind of a big deal because, Disney didn't credit their artists at this time. It was just branded Disney. And people just figured out, there's one guy that always does good stories. He's the good duck artist. And eventually it became known that that was Carl Barks. And then Don Rosa took over for him around 1987. And Don Rosa is also supremely talented, and he's really, really funny. So this is a Don Rosa comic, because this is 1990. He was doing the comics at this point in time. I can't go into their whole history, and I'm not going to review this whole story, but it was the cover caught my eye right off the bat. It's got Donald holding his nephews as a turkey, and I was like, well, that's kind of dark in a way. It's a joke, but let me read the story. Okay, so in brief, Daisy says that there's going to be a town festival. She's the queen of it, and whoever brings in the most turkey to the festival gets to sit and eat with her. She's the queen, and whoever brings the most food is the king. His nephews are like, oh, you should bring wild turkey. Donald's like, yeah, I'll bring wild turkey. So that's the story, is him and his super lucky cousin Gladstone competing to bring in the most turkey. That is so strange to me. I started thinking about it, and I'm like, this is a story about ducks that are carnivores that are catching turkeys. In Disney's Zootopia, only mammals evolved. So you're like, okay, they could still be eating, fish and fowl and insects, whatever, they're animals. That sort of made sense. But then I was thinking about the Disney stuff, and I was like, well, that's true. We've got Goofy, who's an anthropomorphic dog. He walks on 2 legs. And then there's Pluto, who can't talk, and he's on 4 legs. He's still a pet. So it's sort of Disney has it both ways. They've got their animals that are human-like in Duckburg, and then they have wild animals, like these turkeys that they'll eat for Thanksgiving. I was like, this is so strange to me. How have I never thought about this issue before? And I started reading. I was like, are there any theories that explain this? And there really aren't. It's just something that evolved over time. These were anthropomorphic characters, and they would eat, other animals. And it's not considered weird because they're treated as humans. But it's kind of strange when you think about it. And then I started thinking about, well, actually a lot of Disney comics have sort of weird, dark moments in their past. For instance, when Mickey Mouse was a newspaper comic strip, there was a whole week where he was suicidal because Minnie wouldn't date him, and he just kept trying to kill himself but failing. You could never do that today. So this story involves Donald going for geese, and this guy pretends to own the land, and he says, it's no hunting. You got to give me $50 if you want to catch turkeys here. Donald's like, hey, that's a great deal. I can get a lot more than $50 worth of turkey. He pays the guy, only to find out that he was a shyster. When they get home, they realize, Donald and his nephews realize that the turkeys are in disguise. They're really just chickens in cheap costumes. Anyway, they go back to hunt for more, knowing that the shyster guy is gone. And Gladstone says like, hey, you know, I'm going to hunt too. And so Donald says, well, that'll be $50. Gladstone is always super lucky. So he goes, sure, no problem. And then all of a sudden a bunch of wild turkeys attack Donald for no reason, and Gladstone captures them and he becomes the king. However, there's a substitute queen. As they explain, Daisy was just talking too much, so she hurt her jaw. So Donald gets to feed Daisy soup, and Gladstone, his luck actually made him unlucky. He has to date some sort of total beast as the substitute queen. It's a funny little story, but boy, is it strange. Like, I would love to hear from you. Like, how does this world exist where there are carnivorous ducks eating chickens and turkeys? Ducks are on top of the food chain above turkeys and chickens. Like, I would never have guessed that. That is so strange to me. This is just a bizarre comic. I want to know, are there other weird instances like that? If there's a story where Clarabelle Cow has sat down to have a steak dinner, I've got to read that at some point. Anyway, at some point down the road, I'll probably do a Comic Tropes episode about at least Carl Barks, but maybe also about Don Rosa or about the whole lineage of Walt Disney's comics and stories. All three are really interesting topics. I just came across this story for Thanksgiving, and I was like, I gotta talk about this. This is just bizarre to me. Anyway, if you celebrate, if you're here in the United States and you celebrate it, happy Thanksgiving. I hope you have a good one. I hope you have some good food, or you get to spend time with family. I hope you get a break maybe. It's a tough time of year. You know, the sun is down early. There's some of us that fight depression and seasonal affective disorder, and the hectic nature of getting ready for like Christmas or other holidays on top of Thanksgiving, dealing with all the family. It can be intense. I understand. Good luck with it. I want to say thank you to everybody who's been supporting me lately. I've been doing some art live streams. A lot of people have been dropping in on those. That's been a hell of a lot of fun for me. I've been getting a bunch of new patrons on Patreon. Thank you. That really helps me offset the costs of producing this show. I know it may seem pretty modest by the standards of some other shows out there, but it does cost me something to make these, even just to get the comics. Like, I don't own most of these comics that I choose to review. I know about a lot of them. I used to own them, but I sold off a ton of comics 4 years ago, so I don't really have much of a collection. And the support just to get comics, to get equipment for shooting this stuff, very, very helpful. Very much appreciated. All right, I've said more than I intended to. Until next week, keep reading comics.